Bethesda game with no story, no exploration, and nonsense world building. A space game without space or space travel. Join a guild of explorers who supposedly have been active for generations, who have not explored a single thing. Walk 50 meters from their front door, and the largest human settlement in the galaxy, and you're in a completely unmapped territory with completely unknown fauna. You can scan for no reason. Visit farmers who live on airless moons where nothing grows, orbiting verdant green planets where no one lives. Visit small settlements with a handful of buildings that are supposedly humanity's largest remaining cities. See the same dungeon, cave, or base over and over again after walking for 10 minutes across a flat, dull, and uninspired square of terrain with nothing to see or do. Build a spaceship for no reason, since travel is just a click on a map, no space travel necessary. Even if you get Starfield for free, get a refund. That is one of the recent reviews for Starfield on Steam, and it's still full of negativity. Out of all the Bethesda experiences, this is one of the lowest ones. I think it is the lowest one. It is still extremely mixed right now, with just 59% of recent reviews positive, and overall it's 58% based on over 100,000 reviews. And that has been Starfield since day one. It's had a very mixed reception. Bethesda doesn't seem to very much agree with that assessment, but Starfield, I think the biggest insult about it is that it's just boring. I think it's one thing to have a bad game, another obviously to have a good game, but I think the worst thing you can be is boring and bland. And when you compare this to the likes of Fallout and the Elder Scrolls, I think a lot of fans of these franchises are in agreement that this was a mistake and let's just ditch Starfield and not come back to this universe. There's just nothing interesting about it, and that really falls on Bethesda for not building this universe up and creating anything of interest. And that is going to be the biggest obstacle that they have moving forward, because their first big expansion, Shattered Space, was supposed to address this. They were going to be tackling the most mysterious faction in the game, the House of the Serpent, and it went absolutely nowhere. It was actually a total disaster and made the reception surrounding this game even more negative, and also even more concerned about the future of Bethesda Game Studios as a developer. Again, the assessment that I've had, this is something a lot of people have been talking about for a while. It's kind of wild how Starfield had almost non-existent cultural impact or relevance compared to previous titles. And again, the hype that was surrounding this game, it was up there. This was supposed to be the big, Xbox RPG that was going to get people talking, wanting to buy an Xbox console, get, players invested into this ecosystem, and that just did not happen. Like, I don't even know the name of a single NPC or have seen any art or parts of the story. Meanwhile, Skyrim, Fallout 3, New Vegas 4 are still around to this day. Some people may, contribute that to because Fallout and Elder Scrolls have been around for decades now, and they have multiple entries and tons of established lore, but there was an opportunity there with Starfield, and there's just I mean, like this individual says, naming characters, there's Sarah Morgan, there's Andreja, those are companions, and outside of that, there's a cowboy that you can romance guy. That's all I can remember about it. Even the story of Constellation, there's not much I remember about the experience because it was extremely forgettable. And this just goes back with the overall assessment that a lot of people have, that it's a very boring and bland game. And like I said, Shattered Space, this was supposed to be the big moment. This was supposed to be like what happened with Cyberpunk 2077. Things were going to turn around now, but it didn't go that way. This was an insult of an expansion that cost $30 You compare this to some of the other expansions over the years, the likes of CDPR with The Witcher 3, Blood and Wine, Hearts of Stone. Those cost even less. And again, the amount of content that was provided in those experiences was far more than what we got with Shattered Space. And obviously, the quality was there with those experiences, not with Shattered Space, which was just insulting on so many different levels. And the problem I really have with this expansion, it's one thing that it is really, really bad. It's also the fact that Bethesda didn't want to take any ownership over this. We heard from one of the lead design, directors at Bethesda, Emil Pagliaro, I can never say his last name right. Yeah, he says, team is proud of Shattered Space, but they're not ignoring players' feedback. And I think this was actually from a different lead producer, but there was also Emil who said the same exact thing in a different interview. I think that was done by Games Radar. So Bethesda certainly, how they felt about this expansion versus players, very, very different and very, very worrying at the same time, especially in regards to future content from this developer. But this has just kind of been the MO with this game. Bethesda just seems to have a very different assessment about how they feel about Starfield and how players. This goes with the base game as well, as Todd Howard in May of 2024 did an interview in which he just said, why is Starfield so divisive? it was just too different than you've seen from us in the past, and people were making too many similarities, comparisons to Fallout and the Elder Scrolls. You know what they followed that up with? With a Fallout Far Harbor-like expansion with Shattered Space, which ended up being abysmal and probably the worst piece of content that they've ever produced. So again, all of this is just very concerning with the fact that Todd Howard and his team just not taking any ownership about what has happened with Starfield. And that probably is why it comes as no surprise. Over the last year, we've heard silence from this developer in terms of Starfield. And I think that's for good reason. And maybe that indicates some good content is on the way, but the biggest issue is the fact that I just don't know if an audience is there waiting for this game or for it to even get better. And yeah, this was another thing. This goes back to a different video I did at the beginning of the year in which I talked about Todd Howard and the problem with him as, you know, the lead at Bethesda. It's his way or the highway. Former Starfield dev says all decisions on Bethesda RPGs run through Todd Howard. He would hate for me saying that. He doesn't believe it's true, but unfortunately it is true. And again, some of the design decisions that have been made with Starfield and Bethesda overall, just mind-boggling. And this is what Starfield is today. It has 5,000 players on Steam. It's just, I mean, when you compare this to the other Bethesda RPGs, this is really, really bad. And especially with the fact that they wanted this game to go on for many, many years. I don't think people understand that. You know, having just 5,000 players, that's not what they wanted. They want this to be like Skyrim-esque, in which, you know, has dozens of thousands of players playing daily. And they had their little bump with the expansion in September of 2024. It went up to about 22,000, which nowhere near the 330,000 at launch. But yeah, it quickly fell, and over the last couple of months, it's been hitting a high of about 5,000. That's just not good. And then when you compare it to other RPGs, here you go. You got Cyberpunk 2077, still 30,000 plus players, and Baldur's Gate 3, the game, the RPG that they went head-to-head up against, 34,000. And then even the other Bethesda experiences, Fallout 4, Skyrim, more players. I find it crazy, the fact of so much hype, so much work that went into Starfield, and this is what it produced months later. There just isn't that community that I really thought was going to develop around this game. And again, this just calls into question, even if this game does suddenly get better in the future with a massive update or something, I just don't think many people are going to care about Starfield. And this is what Bethesda has been saying as of late. I know a lot of people have been thinking, maybe even written in the comments, is this game abandoned yet? No, it's actually not. Earlier this year, Bethesda said that, yeah, a lot of exciting things are going to be coming in 2025. This was a tweet that they put on their Twitter account, March 2025. We know you're eager for an update. We truly appreciate your passion for Starfield. The team has been hard at work, and while we're not ready to share specific details just yet, we have a lot of exciting things planned for the game this year that we can't wait to talk about when the time is right. We're always listening and taking your feedback to heart. Thanks for being part of the journey with us. And that's all they had to say in regards to Starfield's future, and that's all they've said since then. And Bethesda, this is kind of what they've been doing. There's been a lot of silence in between content updates. This is something that happened with Shattered Space. Some of you may remember this, but in last year, they were very, very quiet until they finally revealed Shattered Space, and then, well, we obviously know how that went, but yeah. Bethesda remembers Starfield exists, promise more content soon. And this was in April of 2024. We obviously got Shattered Space later. Todd said in an interview with IGN, we're doing a lot of Starfield work as we keep busy on things such as Elder Scrolls 6. We have some really good updates that are going to get announced soon, so a lot going on here. And that was the Rev 8 launch, that land vehicle that, again, it just doesn't really work with the maps and the overall design of the game. And then obviously you got Shattered Space. But this is what Starfield has been in 2025. I know a lot of people may be wondering, has this game gotten updates? And it has. It just hasn't been anything even worth, updating the game for. Bethesda and Starfield has just been, pointing attention to all of the mod creations that have been made, all the mods that they get a cut out of. And this is pretty much on the Bethesda website. Yeah, you can get an estate home, a placeable player home for 300 credits. There's some free content, some new weapons. These are all things that they've promoted on their social media the last couple of months. Ryujin and Taiyo, one of the companies in the game, have generously agreed to grant the public the use of a selection of executive ship hubs known as these style of hubs. Another free content update. And then, yeah, explore the Everbright Sanctum and shape its future across multiple quests, 600 credits. And again, this is all paid currency that you would have to pay for through Bethesda. And yes, this is some of the content updates that they have provided, and it's just creation stuff. That's the only features that they've added to the game. Last year, there was some new maps that they added to the game, some really nice quality of life updates. And I think a lot of people were encouraged by that stuff, hoping that we'd see a lot more of that, but we haven't so far. And yeah, they added very low display settings to improve performance on some devices. A creation kit added the ability for creators to add new icons to the game, and yeah, a bunch of gameplay improvements and such. And just recently, this was actually in recent days, minor improvements to format and display and creation menus, minor improvements to sorting the missions menu, general crash and stability fixes. That's Starfield in 2025. That is summarized what has happened to this game. And yeah, it is a absolute pathetic joke right now. I think Shattered Space really just turned a lot of people against this game and made many people just turn into, even if you believed a little bit like this game was going to turn it around, I think that was the moment in which a lot of like big fans of this franchise or fans of Bethesda finally said, enough's enough, let's just move on. It's not going to get better. But fortunately, maybe for those individuals, the few that do still exist, there's probably only a handful, but there is indication that Bethesda has some big content coming. This was something that was revealed over the summer. Starfield DLC reportedly still in the works alongside the Elder Scrolls 6. This was from Jez Corden, a journalist at Windows Central. He said, Bethesda's core team is still working on Starfield. Starfield's going to have more DLC from what I've heard. I don't know when. I just heard that at least the Starfield DLC and this post-layoffs, by the way, hasn't been canceled. And that's the big thing. Microsoft has been going through mass layoffs. They've been rearranging a lot of stuff going on in the company. They've been kind of closing down studios, experiences that just aren't going well. Obviously, we've seen the cancellation of games like Everwild and Perfect Dark as an example of that. And even ESO, the ESO team was working on a new live service looter shooter, I think that was the rumor. That also got canceled. So a lot of people were questioning, maybe Starfield's going to be getting the axe, but that's not the indication here. It could, though, be canceled in the future. Next quarter, I don't know, but for right now, it's not canceled. So the core teams of Bethesda right now are working on Starfield DLC, and also the Elder Scrolls 6 is full steam ahead, and probably still years away at this point. And we've had some other leaks and rumors just recently that give more indication about the plans of Starfield. And yes, it is reportedly finally coming to PlayStation 5 in early 2026. And this following week's sales of the first expansion. So it seems like what was happening inside of Bethesda, they were planning to have this second expansion, which is said to be rumored to be called the Starborn because of a trademark that was filed by ZeniMax and Bethesda. That probably indicates that they're going to be expanding probably on the ending of Starfield. But yeah, they pushed it back. Some of the new content that they're going to be introducing, I guess they're giving themselves more time. And, you know, the silence probably goes alongside that. They just don't want people to... I don't think they want to set any expectations at this point. And there's not a lot of attention on Starfield. I think if they deliver some new content that's, you know, maybe earth-shattering or something really good, maybe that'll get people more invested in this franchise. I'm extremely skeptical on that point. But this report, according to MP First's sources, Bethesda's owner is currently targeting a spring, March to mid-June 2026 release for a PlayStation 5 version of the game, which is yet to be officially announced. The site claims the sci-fi RPG isn't coming to PlayStation 5 this year, partly due to the weak sales of its first expansion, Shattered Space. And again, after Shattered Space tanked, Bethesda, obviously, the team within that company, I'm hoping that they really listen to a lot of the criticism that they received, but I think there's a part of this that's not being talked about enough, and it's just too little too late. While Microsoft's plans could change, it's claimed that Starfield's PlayStation 5 release is being timed to coincide with the launch of the game's second expansion and other quality of life updates, so I would imagine probably like a Starfield Complete Edition is probably going to be launching around that time, probably for like $70 or so. I think that has to be what they're going to be doing, and then you get all of the DLC, you get Shattered Space, and maybe this rumored expansion, Starborn, whatever it is. Additionally, MP First isn't expecting the PlayStation 5 version of Starfield to be announced at Gamescom this month. And that's rather interesting. I would assume that it would be announced. But again, we're here almost at the 2-year mark of Starfield. I think that a lot of people would expect Bethesda to finally open up and say that, yeah, this game is still alive, we're still working on it, but I guess not. Maybe that's something that's going to be planned for maybe the Game Awards later this year. That'd be my guess at this point. But Yeah, Starborn is the rumored expansion. I said this in my last video about Starfield, which is a while ago, but I do think Starborn is going to be focused on gameplay in the same way that Nuka World for Fallout 4 was focused on gameplay. And there, of course, has been leaks that indicate that this is indeed the case. Leaks hint at new cruise mode in development. This is a leak that came just today. Modder, this individual, recently discovered new references to a possible ship travel overhaul in Starfield's August update. Specifically hidden within a source file, the code points to a new cruise mode feature possibly designed to manage quest scripting and trigger in-game events during interplanetary travel. One of those big things that should have been there day one, but it does indicate it is finally on the way. This is a significant departure from Starfield's current travel system, which renders long-distance navigation as loading screens rather than a continuous in-game process. Again, this is one of the big things I said from the beginning. All of this loading screens, it ruins the immersion, and finally it seems like Bethesda's learning this lesson, but it's just coming way too late. While nothing has been officially announced, the presence of this functionality suggests Bethesda could be preparing real-time seamless travel, possibly with an in-game time acceleration mechanic to offset the immense distances between celestial bodies. Notably, one Starfield fan previously demonstrated that uninterrupted travel between planets is technically possible, though it took dozens of hours of in-game time due to vast space distances. With cruise mode, Bethesda might finally offer a more practical and immersive version of that concept. And this is stuff that's already been accomplished by modders, and it now looks like Bethesda themselves are going to be incorporating this aspect into the experience. And the bigger issue with this is that you're going to be making it that players can, have a more immersive experience going planet to planet, but the problem is that one planet just doesn't have, any of these planets really don't have a lot of enjoyable content on them. You've seen everything you need to really on most, one planet you go to. The procedural generation is very limited with, I guess you could say, enjoyment. I think this is where Bethesda is at their worst with procedural generation. That's why Starfield making this a core, aspect of the experience, it never really sounded all that exciting to me, and obviously it didn't work. And for a lot of players, I think Bethesda fans, Bethesda is at their best when they're working on handcrafted content. And where Starfield went wrong for a lot of players is the fact that you have one planet with handcrafted content here, and then you have to go across the galaxy to get to another where you get the same thing. And, and Fallout and the Elder Scrolls games, you have all of that on one big map. So, the immersion is still there. But in Starfield, it's just playing menu simulator. And now, being able to have interplanetary, that's great, but you need to have content that really takes advantage of that. And I guess I have to be assuming that maybe with Starborn, they're going to be expanding on procedural generation within these planets, maybe adding more handcrafted stuff that you can come upon. That has to be the way that they're going to be taking this, because if they're not, it really just kind of feels like a waste of time and something that I would have preferred if they're going to make a future game something to incorporate. I mean, it's great to see as a quality of life improvement, but I don't know if it's something that's going to be winning back players. Very much so, this reminds me of the Rev 8 land vehicle. Initial thoughts was, this is exciting, it's awesome that we're going to be able to get around these, planets easier, but once the implementation came, we got to play it for about 10 minutes, we realized the problem with it. The entire experience wasn't built around it, and that's kind of my concern with interplanetary travel. It's just the fact that this is something that needed to be taken advantage of in the early part of development in the game, built around it, and that's obviously something that Bethesda can't do now because we're a couple of years post-launch with Starfield. So there just has to be content. They really have to revamp the experience to incorporate and make people want to do interplanetary travel, and right now that remains to be seen, but I have to believe that Bethesda is thinking about that. But again, the Rev 8 land vehicle, the same thought probably should have gone through their minds, and I guess it didn't. And especially with the Rev 8, it was more notable because of the fact that Shattered Space came out a couple of months later, and none of the experience took advantage of this land vehicle at all. If anything, it was a pain in the ass to use, but yeah, I got people from point A to point B faster, I suppose. And yeah, one of the reactions to this comment, again, this is just Bethesda. This is how they're taking their road since Shattered Space. Major companies are silent on this kind of work because they don't want to get the community's hopes up. Added features, especially when it changes or adds a major feature, is definitely done behind closed doors. That way, if the feature fails to deliver, they pull it without negative PR that could potentially finish burying a game. And I think that this has been what's been happening. I think they're experimenting with a lot of different ways that they can make this game more enjoyable in terms of its gameplay. gameplay. And I think that really is going to be the road that they're going to be taking with Starborn, but I also think you can look to the modding community further to see some of the things that Bethesda probably is going to be incorporating in Starborn. One of those would be, you know, the ability to land and walk on asteroids in Starfield, or taking more advantage of zero-G, you know, maybe flying around or being around space finally in a game that is, you know, about, you know, space travel and such. But this is something that was accomplished day one. Modders had already been incorporating stuff like this, so very likely this is something that Bethesda themselves could make a feature out of. And there's other, you know, mods that have been worked on for months. I think like the land vehicle was something that modders had done day one as well, or in the early weeks. So Bethesda, you know, learning from the modding community goes hand in hand. We've seen that time and time again, and I think that this is just different things that they can do to freshen up Starfield. But this just goes back to my bigger issue with the experience. The writing, the lore, you know, the overall content just is not good enough. And even if you know, up the gameplay experience, this is still an experience that costs money, and Starborn is probably still going to be a paid experience unless Microsoft finally gets generous and doesn't, you know, charge $30 fucking for another expansion. I don't know what the price point of this is going to be, but I do think Starborn, I really almost think that it should be free. You can look to what Cyberpunk 2077 did with their comeback. They incorporated a lot of free quality of life improvements. Phantom Liberty obviously was an expansion of its own, but a lot of the new mechanics and gameplay was its own free update. And I really do think Bethesda should be following that playbook. I mean, even No Man's Sky, the way that that game repaired its relationship, Hello Games, with its community, years of free content. And I almost feel like Starfield has to go down that road. There just is not interest at all in this experience. And I don't think you really can change the overall reception regarding Starfield, but you can still bring in people and at least make them a little bit more excited for the future. And look, Starfield has had a bold ambition. This is something that Todd Howard was talking about last year in an interview. I believe this was with YouTuber Mr. Matty Plays, but they want to update this game for years. They want content updates every single year. They want it to be like Skyrim. But the problem is there is not a community that wants that right now. So Starborn, right now, I think Starfield is a pathetic joke. I'm just going to be honest. I think it's an embarrassment, a really bad look for Bethesda as a developer. It almost feels like a developer that is long past their prime. And Starborn, if they want to, you know, get people invested or any interest in this franchise, Starborn has to be really, really good. And I'm just extremely skeptical that this team can do that. And, you know, everything that they said about Shattered Space is still something that runs in my mind. The fact that they weren't saying, okay, we understand that the community gamers are not happy with this. They didn't say that. They said they were proud of it. They really enjoyed it themselves, and they felt that this is the game that they wanted to make. And that's not what people wanted to hear. And since then, it's been total silence. So it's unclear exactly what other, you know, content that they may be building. I'm sure that there's going to be some type of story stuff. Maybe they'll be incorporating aliens, something to give interest into this franchise. But right now, none of that exists, and in 2025 it almost feels like Starfield is kind of this abandoned experience, but it isn't that. Bethesda obviously behind the scenes is working hard on new content, new gameplay improvements and such, but they're just being quiet about it because I'm sure they're experimenting with all kinds of different ways that they can get people to come back. And say what you will, I just don't know if that's ever going to happen, even if this gets, you know, one of the best content updates ever. But anyway, what do you make of Starfield here in 2025? Is this a game that you even think about? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. But thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this video, or if you found any informative value. Consider subscribing for more videos like this, and I'll see you later.